Listen up. There's no more excuses.
We're empowering those who want the hustle by exposing the status quo.
The days of ordinary are over.
It's time to crush mediocrity and start discovering your greatest potential.
Welcome to the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation.
To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation.
Welcome back to Hustle Nation Podcast. This is episode number 7. We're pretty excited. We've gotten through the whole acronym of Hustle. So whether you're new to us or you've listened to a couple episodes, we're going to start to really dive into some new subjects. And today we got a real treat. We're going to talk a little bit more about 2022 leadership and business trends. There's a lot that's been shaking up the business world, not just this year, but the last couple years. So we'll talk in depth about that. And we'll also then recap what some of our predictions are for 2023. So Dustin, I'm going to pass the baton off to you. What is subject number 1 for 2022 leadership trends?
So one of the things I think that has been really interesting in 2022 is this clash of cultures relative to remote work, hybrid work, and then in-office work. And there's been a lot of talk about this over the last year, and certainly it was spurred on by COVID, but it's been really interesting to see how we look at the end of this year versus how we looked at the beginning of this year. You know, in many ways, the beginning of this year, the talk was, remote work is the thing. Everyone is going to get away from the office. Office cultures don't really have any impact. To then all of a sudden you start seeing, even Silicon Valley and tech companies, which everyone assumed would be the last companies to ever bring somebody back into the office, actually requiring people to come back into the office so many days a week because, they too had realized from a culture perspective, there needed to be some sort of investment in that. And, it's interesting, no matter who you talk to, everybody's right? So if you're a fully remote workforce, you're the genius and that's the right way to go. If you're 100% in office, how can you have a culture without? And, I think, like so many things, I think every business, it's different. And I think, hybrid is certainly a big part where a lot of organizations have found themselves in the middle. But it's created some really interesting conversations about culture. One of probably the most interesting things that I've seen is for a while there, it was, I would say pre-COVID, if you were talking to people about remote work or even a hybrid work environment, there were a lot of people that would just say, well, you can't have culture and have that structure. And which is crazy, right? I mean, that's not true at all. There are tons of organizations that work 100% remote that have culture. Now, it may not be the culture you want, or it may not be the culture that your organization has historically had, but that doesn't mean there's not a culture, and it doesn't even mean it's a bad culture. It just means that it is a culture. And really what I think I've seen is, I don't care who you are. I've seen businesses that have nailed it on remote, nailed it in an office, and have nailed it in hybrid. And I think there's a lot to do with what your culture, what you want it to be, and what maybe your industry is used to. As an example, the manufacturing type industries where you have 70 to 80% of your workforce that has to show up because you have to do the work, right? You have to build the thing. Certainly the 20 to 30% of office workers in that organization, it's really, really hard for them to be hybrid and even more so for them to be remote. But there's so many organizations in this world that you don't need to have anyone in person. And therefore being remote can work all day long. But the thing that has amazed me more than anything is it really has come down to, are you designing your culture intentionally or just randomly? Because that I think has ultimately been the thing. There's people that are like, well, I have to have people in the office because I have to see them and I have to interact with them. And don't get me wrong, for us at McClone, we believe that there needs to be some in-office element because of our business. Our business, it's highly collaborative. Geography does matter because we have to be in front of our customers often in person. So there is some of that is needed. But really, our in-office requirements are not high. We could do a lot in the hybrid. But the key is we've had to be more intentional than about what that means. right? What does that culture mean, and how do we bring in people? How do we integrate new people? How do we tell people what our culture is so they can decide, is this a culture I want to be part of and add to, or is this a culture I'd rather go somewhere else?
So it sounds like you talk to people, and including yourself. And pre-COVID, there was a lot of companies that were in person, but were those big corporations like those Fortune 500s were just changing their tune a little bit on more flexibility, more casual work environment with dress and things like that. And COVID obviously brought a lot of the workers saying, we really like this remote thing. Or maybe in your case, we kind of like the hybrid thing. And it seems like now, as I hate to say this, some people may disagree, COVID seems to be more in the rearview mirror. Now companies are making a push to be back in person. So to your point, it's a bit of a culture clash, which is maybe the employees are starting to say, okay, you know what? I do miss my friends. I miss my colleagues. I miss my boss. I like being in this environment, because there's an argument to be made that you can be more productive at home. And there's another one to be made. You're more productive in the office. And I'm sure your boss would agree you're more productive in the office. But like you said, it depends on the culture you want to build or you want to evolve to. Because if you look at two service companies in the same industry, they don't have the same culture. Maybe they don't want the same culture. So you intentionally have to build that culture based on what is that environment? Is it in person? Is it hybrid? Is it pro-choice, meaning you can kind of do whatever you want as long as you're getting your shit done? And that to me is what's really important. And you look at all these companies, I'd be hard pressed to believe that the majority of companies who are successful today and have made it through COVID haven't evolved their culture. Or if you haven't, maybe you're the one who's in trouble. But you have to evolve with the times, to me, is really the key. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer here. I just think that maybe for me it is, how are you pivoting and how are you evolving to match your workforce? Because I know you and I, we're Wisconsin based. Mm-hmm. I own a marketing company. You own an insurance company. Those two companies in California, Florida, wherever, may have a different culture because they're in different areas, different people. I may have a younger team. You may have an older team. Therefore, cultures could be different. So I think it's really a matter of, you really have to take a deep look inside. And then from there, how do we evolve to get to be the culture where people want to work here? Because I think that's something we're going to talk on a little bit more, is how do you become more attractive? And you become attractive because you have a great culture. And as you know, that is just an evolving, ever-going, fluid conversation that we're always trying to perfect, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is no end game for culture, right? It's not like you've nailed culture and it's perfect. One of the things, we've even seen for our organization, we've evolved our culture every year, right? And whether it was COVID or not, right, your culture is always, it's changing one way or the other, and it's whether you're intentionally doing it or you're not. And it's one of those things where we saw this actually just we had our kind of strategic planning as we're looking into 2023. And, one of the things we've seen is our culture is differentiated, and it is attracting the right people, right? The people that want to be part of this culture and want to be part of something, right? That it's attracting them. But, there was about a week before our offsite, there was one or two things that kind of popped up that we just, as a leadership team, we just didn't like. We're like, man, this seems off character for us. This seems, out of track. And, so we talked about it actually at kind of the beginning of our offsite. And it was interesting because as I shared with everyone, that's when culture matters, is when it wasn't, it's not like we have, mass exodus or anything like that. It was literally just, there was one thing that we felt wasn't in line with the culture we've outlined. And, to me, that's when you're starting to get culture by design, is when, your team and your organization can spot it and can call it out so you can address it, right? Because there's no culture that's perfect. You're going to make missteps, right? We're talking about people here, but the idea being is that's when you're doing it by design, as opposed to, well, it changed over the course of the year. And for, attracting the right people, they're doing their homework. There's people have choices. People can choose to work somewhere or not choose somewhere. And they're asking people, they're asking around, they're asking, beyond just the interview question, you know, what do they look like on social? What are people talking about them? What's the reputation in the community? And, you know, all it takes is a little bit of crack in the armor, and it gets to be really hard for those good people to say, yeah, I'm going to take that shot.
I'm going to talk a lot more about that in our next subject. So I'm glad you brought that up. For me, when we zoom out a little bit, we talk about what will this look like next year and for the future. I think that there's going to be a lot of companies that are going to ask their employees to come back, or that's just going to be a part of the culture because, as we're going to talk about, there's a lot of turnover happening right now with positions and teams and companies. And that's just going to be a part of the new onboarding, is that the expectation is 75%, 60%, whatever it is, right? And I think you have to be intentional about how you communicate that. So, for example, if you look at some of the millennials, if you look at really, I would say, what is the 35 and under, they and everybody, no one wants to be micromanaged. And you see these articles online from Forbes and wherever, they're talking about how we micromanage these employees who are remote and or hybrid. They want to make sure they're engaged, they're working, you know, and that to me is very difficult. I think if that is your culture where you are hybrid to remote, I would really urge companies not to, because you got to give your employees some rope. And if you give them some leash, they're either going to shine or they're going to hang themselves, because it's just a matter of time before someone self-selects out when given that much leash. And sometimes it doesn't take very long. I don't know what you've seen, but in my experience with hiring people, managing teams, sometimes all you need is 3-4 months, and you will know for sure if this individual is fit for that role and maybe fit for your culture. So to me, if again, there's no right or wrong answer, but if that's the direction you're going, I think you have to be very trusting. And I don't think you need to put all these tools in place to ensure productivity, because if you are truly a team, if you do truly have good culture and you have weekly, bi-weekly meetings and check-ins, and you have technology like CRMs, you'll know if someone's engaged. You'll know if someone's putting in the time. And it just doesn't take much to know the level of engagement and the level of productivity from your team.
Yeah, and it's tough because you can't be universal. You know,
No.
As I've said from the beginning of this thing, you got, there's 20% of the workforce that can't work from home. There's 20% of the workforce that can't work in the office. And some of those are the same people, right? It doesn't matter whether they're in the office or at home. And the key is identifying who are those people. I mean, I know on our team, there are certain people that we can absolutely prove they work so much better at home. And that's what they need to do. And what their role requires, that makes sense. There are others that maybe they very much could, but they're a leader and we need them for collaboration. And so, they can be hybrid, but we need them here because we need them to spread the culture and spread their wisdom and spread their knowledge and, things like that. And, then there's others that, they need to be here. Right. And whether that be by job or just, what they can get done in a day, it's been interesting. I mean, as I look, where I think this is going, I think in a lot of ways productivity is rearing its ugly head, right? When an economy is kicking butt and everybody, we're trillions of dollars are being injected into the economy, right? Like it's tough to mess that up, right? And you see it. I mean, obviously the tech companies are in many ways kind of leading the charge here, right? I mean, they're just doing, mass cuts, and, lots of organizations are doing, more cuts and more layoffs. And the reason being is because, now all of a sudden there's rough waters ahead. Productivity matters, right? And, people are starting to look at that and saying, okay, well, what does that mean? And I think the challenge is, I think a lot of organizations, there are people that aren't pulling their weight, and there are people that are more than pulling their weight. And the challenge with that micromanagement, right? There are times to hold people accountable. There's no doubt. And certainly there's a trust but verify element where you have to know if people are getting it done, right? But my experience has been it's really all that stuff is to try to find who is that, where is that 20%? Because that 20% that's lagging back, and it may not even be they're bad people. Maybe they're not trained. Maybe they're just not efficient yet. Maybe they're just getting up to speed, right?
Poor leadership.
Doesn't mean they're bad people. Yeah, poor leadership, right? I mean, it can be a lot of those things, but that 20% or whatever that number is so critical, because if you have that 20% and they're not being productive for whatever reason, the 80% of people that you trust, that you can rely on, that are doing the day to day, they all of a sudden have to do 20% more than what they can to try to get it done. And that's, to me, that's where the golden nugget is how do you drive the understanding of where there are productivity gaps, not to say to the 80% that are cranking it and that they're doing the thing. Okay, let them run, but let's make sure we're finding that 20% so we're not burning those others out.
Yeah, to me, some of the key things you touched on is what are you doing to track productivity? And it doesn't mean that you're monitoring people, but if you're in sales, do you have a billboard? Do you have a CRM? Do you have a tool? If you're in marketing, do you have an analytics tool? Are you measuring? You don't have to measure daily. You don't have to measure weekly. But can you look at this monthly and say point A to point B? Obviously, you need goals to be able to track and measure and report and communicate and things like that. But if you have a tool, just one tool, and you're tracking a couple of things, I think that is the key for me. So let's zoom out, since we have some other subjects to get to. Where do you see this a year or two from now? Full hybrid, full remote, somewhere in between?
Yeah. So, I mean, here's a really safe answer, right? It's going to be all over the board. But I think in reality, where I think this is going is, if you look into 2023 and maybe beyond, inflation is here. We know that, right? And that creates a lot of challenges. That's where this, with inflation, that squeezes margin. Productivity is going to matter. It has impact on employees. It has an impact on the customers, right, and on the whole economy, and that's real. And what that's going to do is we're already seeing it, right? Where there's argument: are we already in a recession? And the idea being is, I think stability is going to come back in vogue. For the last number of years, stability didn't necessarily. It wasn't the sexy thing, right? It was, I want to be part of an organization that is blazing a trail and that is, off a very edgy, and because I don't even think about stability, I don't think about what's going to happen to this company tomorrow. And I think stability is going to come back in vogue. I think that's what we've seen. But the core of it, as we were talking about this and trying to think about, where does this come? I read a lot of different articles, and there's all these, talking heads of, all these innovative things that are going to happen in 2023. And, maybe they're all right. I don't know. But I still go back to, I think, everything I've always seen in tough economies is it's back to the basics. And it's the things that no one wants to talk about because they are so fundamental. But I mean, you got to have good leaders. Go talk to your people, right? Talk to your customers. At the end of the day, you don't have a business if you don't have customers, right? So how are you supporting your team to support your customers? And that leadership development piece. I mean, still today, I mean, this has been proven, I feel like, for like the last decade. Still, if you talk to people that have a manager, they will say that only 2 out of 10 managers don't suck. Which I believe, like, it blows your mind, right? Like, you think, okay, so as an organization, if I have 10 managers, that means 8 of them suck and 2 of them are good. Is that worth it, right? And so many people spend so little time on leadership development and developing people. I think, again, when productivity matters, when stability matters, leadership matters, right? People are gonna need that leader to guide them through this difficult time. And if you don't have strong leaders that you're developing, that you're giving tools on how they can communicate, how they can increase their own productivity in old organization, without that, I think it's going to be really, really tough. And so, I guess that in my mind, in a lot of ways, it's just back to basics. It's, what are the core things that make an organization really, 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 really strong, right? It's leadership, it's culture, it's, what is your mission? What are you focused on really getting done in the world? Not just, hey, I want to grow. And I think if you tie those things together, those focuses, that I think that'll break the, kind of the good companies from the great companies.
Good point. I love it. And that's a really good segue into our next subject, which is quiet quitting. Quiet quitting really became well known in early 2022, kind of as we navigated through the big pandemic. And for those of you, I know you've heard the term, but according to Wikipedia, they describe it as the elevated rate at which U.S. workers resign from their jobs starting in spring of 2021, amid the strong labor demand. Approximately 4 million people left their job. Now, the reason I say it's a good segue is because you said 2 out of 10 are considered good. I do think that was a factor in the whole thing. I really, really do. And
sure.
I mean, I'd be curious to get your opinion, but obviously, people at that point were maybe a little scared about, hey, where is the economy going? Where is the market? Where are we going as a country and as a world? And maybe I should look at another opportunity where there's more flexibility, where there's better culture. And I do think that culture isn't just a buzzword we've seen for the last couple of years. I really, truly think that matters. That may be one of the most important factors to job seekers right now, whether you're passively looking or actively looking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it was a number of things. I think you're absolutely right. I think people will leave their leader before they leave their company, right? That's
said for a long
such
time.
a driver, right? So I absolutely think that was a big part of it. I think the reality was I think it was a tight labor market, and I think there were some organizations that were saying, you know what, being in the office matters, and there were, I think, a cross section of people that said, I like not wearing pants to work, so I'm just gonna, I'm gonna find a remote job. But again, I think that's where the world is changing. So, I saw a lot of organizations that were willing to accept those people for a period of time because they just needed people. But I think in the long run, so many organizations really can't figure out the productivity from home piece. And if you can't, it's really hard to sustain that in the long run. And so I think, a lot of people that left, I think, the reason they left in many cases was because they had other options and they didn't like their company, whether it be their leader, whether it be the culture, whether it be they were trying to get them to come into work. But I think, when we look at, what not only drove it, but then what's going to bring it back. So I think Gallup actually came out and said that their belief is that there's actually over 50% of the workforce now is in a quiet quitting level of engagement, right? Which is, I mean, think about that. That blows your mind, right? You have 100 people, 50 of them basically are not working, right? Like they're doing just enough so they don't get fired, but they're not really engaged, they're not really working. I think it's a great opportunity again for organizations that really focus on culture, focus on engagement. That's their opportunity, because while yes, I think a lot of people were leaving organizations, they were going somewhere, right? I mean, it wasn't like everybody was just quitting their job and hanging out on the beach, right? I mean, there was maybe some of that, but it was, there was a lot of, no, I'm leaving here to go there. And it's because, now I have options. I mean, I'll even use ourselves as an example. I mean, we have people now all over the country, even, geographies that, 3 years ago, we would have said, wow, that's 2-3 hours too far away. That just won't work. It's, we don't know how to integrate it. Now we're pulling those people in. We're saying, look, we know how to do this now. We can stretch our geography greater. We know how to integrate you in a more hybrid world. And so we can do that. We still have our lines, right? There's still certain roles and things like that, we need you here. And as long as you can commit to these things, then we're in, right? So that, you still got to pass on some of those people. But I think that, when you have disruption, who always wins? The better companies still always win.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you've seen. And I think that's what you're going to continue to see. I think as you look at in the last few years, one of the things that COVID did, I think it created a tremendous opportunity. But let's be real. It took a lot of energy out of the management system. There, as leaders, as managers, so many of us had to spend so much time just trying to figure out how the hell are we supposed to do this now? And, now as it's becoming what I'll call more stable, we have a better sense of, okay, this is what this feels like now. This is how this works. And now let's get back to the basics. And I think that's the best organizations, that's what I've seen them do. They've now pivoted. They've embraced who they are now. They put their flags in the ground, and now they communicate. They're driving engagement. They're talking about
Communication is key.
Here's what it is. Exactly right. And that's why 2 out of 10 leaders suck, right? Because they're terrible at communicating. 2 out of 10 are good, I should say.
What I'm hearing you say, and I'm going to distill this down to 2 words, is that organizations are being A, flexible, and B, agile. Flexible and agile. And it's like anything else. When we talk about technology a lot, you don't want to be the last adapter. You want to be an early adapter, the first adapter, because you can then be maybe closer to a disruptor, right? And so I look back at this Great Resignation, and I have a very different perspective. Pre-pandemic, a lot of businesses I was talking to about marketing were so focused because the job market was 2.6% unemployment or lower, depending on where you're at. And it was the war on talent. And now it's different, right? It's a war to find talent or to compete for the talent. And I really believe that now more than ever, and I probably would have said this before the pandemic, but in the last few years, the job seeking thing has really turned. The tables have turned where now the power is probably more in the lap or in the hands of the job applicant. What I mean by that, I'll go into it, is you have so many options available to you. And specifically, if I'm looking for a job, there's a couple ways I can find it. I can go the old-fashioned way. I can go to Indeed, Simply Hired, and I can look for jobs, LinkedIn, whatever. But now there are companies that are hitting me in the newsfeed that are serving me ads. Now there are more and more recruiters that are actively going through LinkedIn, and they're trying to find the right people. And it's really a war to compete against the talent. But what's interesting is that if I'm actively looking or passively looking, the first thing I'm going to do, if I say, that's interesting, I'm going to go to a company's Facebook page. I'm going to go to their LinkedIn page. And if I'm a younger employee, which, by the way, the millennials make up more than 50% of the workforce, probably closer to 65% now. And they do their research. They do their due diligence because they want to know, are there people like me? And if you're female, you want to know, hey, are there females that work here? Is this predominantly male? And whatever it is, you want to know, are there people like me? Maybe similar interests. And I also want to know, do they do things outside of the 4 walls? So is this all just an insurance company? They just hang out inside and they sell insurance all day long? Because if so, that's boring. So they want to know, what are you doing in the community? Can I volunteer? Can I give back? Can I do different things to be involved in my community to make an impact? Is the culture flexible? Do they do fun things? Do they have team building events? I could go on and on. And if they don't see that, they're going to see, director of sales. So what? And that's what I would say to most job applications right now. So what? Who isn't hiring? Who doesn't claim to have great benefits? Well, I hope you have good benefits. You better have good pay. But what are you showing people? And I think what happened was during the pandemic, later half of the pandemic, companies started to get really clever. They started to say, you know what? I get it. Everybody wants remote. Forget it. We're gonna do remote, at least for now. And so I think applicants saw that and they're like, flexibility, remote, I'll take that. Hybrid, yeah, that's exactly what I want. And they started to show their cards a little bit more. They started to showcase who they are. And I think what happened was, you're like, not really that happy. My company isn't really interested in letting me work remote. They're not, really adaptable to this hybrid model. Therefore, I want to leave. And so I think people got really comfortable with this. So kind of zooming out, I think where I'm getting at with all of this is, when it comes down to a marketing standpoint, if you have great culture, you need to show it. You need to talk about it. And if you don't, you are, to me, a big so what? Because when I look at applications online, and I don't care if this is a sales job, marketing, CMO, CIO, whatever, a lot of it's the same. We have great pay. We have great benefits. I don't care. What makes you different? How can you talk about your culture? What are some things that you're doing that other companies aren't? And if you look and sound innovative, I can tell you, whether you're 65, you're 45 or 25, people are going to be interested. And that, to me, is kind of where I think we've changed and where I think businesses really need to evolve right now if you haven't already. And I've told people I've had different applications I've put up over the last year. I've had if not hundreds of applications because I had to get really creative. And I looked through tons of applications to see, okay, what are little things I can pull out of this one that makes this one stand out? Why is this one getting more applications than that one? And so I think if you do your research, you can let your culture shine through on some of these new opportunities you're hiring for. But you also have to show it on social media because applicants will continue to peel back the layers of the onion or peel back the curtain. And they want to know what's this company like? We all know you sell insurance, but what makes you different? Why is it fun to work there? Because as well as I do, people want to have fun at work. They spend almost as much time at work as they do at home with their family. And so you got to make it interesting. You got to make it fun. And even if you think you're a little bit fun, you got to show it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's when you think of how you show that, there was an example of, there was a company that I had met with about a year ago. Excellent culture. They actually did a pretty good job of showcasing it. And then they interviewed people.
Yes.
When they interviewed people, they brought them in the side door, interviewed them in the basement. They had this beautiful facility, right? And why they didn't take them in the lobby of that beautiful facility, but nobody looked at it before, right? They're just like, man, our culture is incredible. We're getting the applicants, but nobody's getting pulled through. And so literally just talking to them, you're like, well, why don't you just interview them in the lobby, the big, beautiful lobby you spent millions of dollars on? Oh, we hadn't even thought of that. And so it's amazing when you think about that, right? And this happens all the time. You got to talk through your culture and be diligent about it and market it. But then to your point, at every step, be able to pull it through and display it. Because the other thing is, you're not going to keep the culture if you bring the wrong people in. Yeah. And so it's got, as much as people want, in a lot of cases, they just want a warm body so they can put it in. If you bring in the wrong people, then the good people are going to go too. And now all of a sudden you're really stuck in it.
For sure. I would say this, with an application or your content or your website, your videos, whatever, videos are great, but you can't just tell them, you have to show them. And even that combined isn't always good enough. I think with anything that you're producing for the internet, for the world, especially content, is you have to attach an emotion or a feeling. Because if they can feel it, you might say, well, Chris, it's a job application. Yeah, but shouldn't they feel good about this? Shouldn't they feel inclined to apply? Because if it's just a job application, why? I would be asking you, why should I apply for this? What makes this so great? Well, we have great benefits. Okay, well, so does everybody else. We have good pay. Well, we have good culture. Okay, well, I didn't feel that. I felt a very sterile, boring application. And I think we could talk about this for a long time. So I'm sure if you're listening, you get the point. But you gotta try a little harder. It's like dating or marriage or anything. Is you gotta put in a little extra effort. So Dustin, wrapping up this subject, do you see the Great Resignation ending? Do you see this continuing into 2022? It's 2023.
Yeah, in 2023. Yes and no. So I believe that there will be. I think the workforce today will continue to be mobile, meaning they will be able to move from job to job relatively efficiently. And so from that standpoint, I think there will still be plenty of movement between employers. I do think, though, however, I think with the economy going to be what it is, I think people are realizing that, in some ways the honeymoon is over. We need to get back to work, and productivity is going to matter, right? And so I think people are starting to see what that feels like, see what that means like, and what that's going to look like in 2023. So I think it's going to continue with the mobility, but I don't think there's going to be the mass exodus. I feel like most employers have kind of put their flags in the ground, but now you have to back it up. So now if you're putting your flag in the ground that you want people to be collaborative and you want them to be in the office or whatever that is, well, now you got to hold true to it. Now you got to make it worth their while, right? If they're just coming into the office and it's no different than them sitting at home, why should they do it? And then they'll just go find another job.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good stuff. I agree with that 100%. All right. Topic number 3, quiet quitting. I'm sure you've heard this term. It's popped up a lot this year. Probably really came to a head late summer, early fall. According to Forbes.com, quiet quitting is what they call it. Unsatisfied employees put forth the least amount of effort possible to keep their paychecks. The rationale for this workplace approach is that work is not the most important thing in people's lives. They shouldn't be putting in extra time without the compensation. Now, there's a lot more to that subject and to that whole comment. But I would ask, and I'd love to hear your opinion because you have a large workforce, would be, is this really a new thing? Or has this really been something that's been happening for a while? And I don't want to put this on millennials because I don't know that this is just the 20 and 30 somethings coming into the workforce. I don't think that's just the case.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I remember when I first saw the term quiet quitting, and I was like, this isn't new. I mean, it's a great new term. Truly. Yeah. I go back to, if you remember the old movie Office Space, right? From the late 90s, where they have these efficiency consultants coming in, and basically the question is, well, what is it that you do here? Right. And, one of the kind of themes of the entire movie is that everyone's completely disengaged because the company culture just sucks. Everybody's got multiple managers. Nobody sees how they're connected to the end game, right? It's kind of this very sterile environment. And I mean, that was 20 years ago, and we were talking about that, right? So that isn't, I mean, to me, that was quiet quitting. I understand why it's coming about. It's a term that people are talking about, but to me, it's the same thing that's existed forever, which is just it's disengagement. Why should I put in the extra work? I mean, that's true of human nature. There are plenty of people that just don't want to put in the extra work just for the sake of it. And, there's always this balance. The best cultures, they reward the right behavior, right? They reward people putting in that extra effort and going that extra degree and things like that. But, there's no culture in the world that can perfectly nail that, right? I mean, there will always be people that just don't want to work. And then there will be people that they want to work, but they're just not inspired. They're not motivated. They don't see what impact they're making. And then there's those that'll just work no matter what you do. And to me, it's that middle segment. And I think why quiet quitting has become such this common topic, common theme, is because, as always happens every couple of years, we have new generations entering that want different things than what a lot of times our cultures are delivering. So they're disengaged. They have no reason to believe that they have any reason and impact that is long lasting. So they get disengaged. So they do just the minimum so they don't get fired. And, to me, that's, again, what are we going to look for in 2023 and beyond? It's how do you fix it? Talk to your people, get good leaders, drive engagement, right? If they see, the old, start with why. If they understand why your organization exists and why what they do matters, they're much more likely to get bought into it. Now, if what you do doesn't matter, that's different, right? But most organizations exist because they're creating value somewhere in the value chain. And so you need to communicate that and understand not only organizationally what value do you create, but what does that role, what value does that create to the end product?
It's a good point. Good point. I think that if you have a big enough workforce, there's always going to be a couple of outliers. And there's almost not anything you can do about it, unfortunately. Not everybody is going to be hardworking. Not everyone's going to put in their 40 or their 42. But you're always also going to have those outliers that do the exact opposite, that are your 40 to 45 hours a week people. And that's cool too. I think that quiet quitting can be prevented for the most part. And I think it goes back to culture, but there's an element within culture that's very important to me. I feel like it's very much relationship based. I think if you have a good relationship, a good rapport, you have communication with your team, that can be absolutely huge. So if they know they have a purpose, they know the team and the company has a purpose, they know we're all really trending toward the right direction, that's important. And I saw a video recently by Bob Huggins, who for the longest time has been an NCAA basketball coach. A very interesting guy, big personality. And he was being interviewed, and he was talking about a player of his who went on to play in the NBA. And he said one day they're in the football stadium and they're running up and down the stairs. And after about 2 times up and down, and keep in mind, they're like 2 minutes into a half-hour workout or more, he said, "Coach, I'm not going to run." And he said, "Okay, well, then you can go home. You're dismissed from the team." He's like, "Well, what do you mean?" He's like, "Yeah, you're off the team. Everyone else is doing it." And the guy started walking away. And he said, "All right, okay, I don't want you to be off the team." And he said, "Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run with you." And he says, "Get this. I go up and down the stairs twice." And he is not an in-shape, fit guy whatsoever. He's also a little on the older side. And he said, "I was dying. I told the guy, literally, fuck off. I can't do this anymore." And he said, this was a turning point. After I got up and down the stairs twice, I was about to quit. And he said, "Coach, I got you. I'll run with you." And he said, all of a sudden, I did nothing, but I pulled the guy in and I said, "I'm going to go." And he knew I wasn't capable of it. But as soon as he saw I cared about him, he wanted me to be able to get through the workout. And he's like, "I went as far as I could before I passed out." Yeah. And that to me, what's interesting, I go back to coaching as we do all so often, is so often, I think as a leader, sometimes people don't care how much you know. They care how much you care. And when you can demonstrate how much you care in a great culture and a great environment, I think that is when you can start to get the engagement and the relationship level through here. And that, to me, is a huge part of eliminating the quiet quitting.
Absolutely right. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that relationship level, it's a thing that it gets so easily overlooked. And the reason being is because everyone gets busy. I know even for myself, you get your list of things. These are the things I need to tackle. And you forget, okay, but what really drives this thing? It's all about relationships. It's all about people. People are the thing doing the thing. And I think when you talk about that leadership development and why so many leaders don't have followers, it's, if you have no relationship, if you haven't communicated the why and they don't believe you're going to bleed with them, the age old "I'm your manager" doesn't work. Nobody wants to work for a manager.
So what?
People will still follow a leader, but people don't want to get managed. And that doesn't mean they don't want to be accountable. That doesn't mean any of that. There's a balance there. But what's the leader you want to follow, right? And that's a fantastic story. I mean, that it speaks to, look, I'm willing to bleed with you. Well, it's a lot easier to follow a leader that, the Braveheart, right? Where I'm going to be right with you, as opposed to the, what, why don't you go do the tough stuff. I'm going to sit back here.
So what do you see 2023 quiet quitting looking like?
So I believe in this next year. I think it really isn't going to change, in my opinion. I don't know that it really has changed. I think there's a lot of talking heads and a lot of people that have talked about engagement and that this is this new thing. Again, I think this has been around for 20 plus years. I think when there's talk about it, I think maybe there brings a little bit more top of mind to people of, oh, maybe I'm quiet quitting, right? Everyone else is not doing the work. Maybe I don't need to do it. I think from that perspective, I think that's gone. I think, with the economy being what it is, I think productivity is going to matter. I think everyone recognizes that. And so I don't think that part is going to exist, but I don't think it ever goes out of vogue to, like what you talked about, to have good leaders building relationships that's driving engagement and buy-in to, this is why we're trying to climb that wall, take that hill. I think that's going to continue to be in vogue. And I think the thing you will see is, I think if you're not paying attention to engagement, I think you'll continue to have it. I think if you are driving engagement, I think you're going to attract more of those people in this next year, because I think a lot of those people that are quiet quitting, they don't want to be that.
No, I don't think so.
They're just disengaged, right? I don't think a whole lot of people wake up in the morning and be like, "Oh, I hope I do nothing useful today." Most people want to go do something. They want to be part
I
of
agree.
something. But if they have no reason to believe it and no reason to buy in, whose fault is it? In my opinion, it's the leader's issue.
I agree. I agree. So we got through, I think, 3 really awesome subjects. What is the fourth?
The fourth to me is really getting back to the basics piece. So to me, that's everything we talked about. All kind of comes back to the same element, which is, what are you doing from a leadership perspective? Are you talking to your people? Are you driving engagement? And are you refocusing the organization for what this new world is going to look like?
That's a good point. So I'm going to go back to sports again. And I love basketball. It's not my favorite sport, but it's probably one of my favorites to watch and be engaged with. And I was fortunate to grow up with Michael Jordan. And while I'm not really a fan of LeBron or Steph Curry, I do respect their game. And I follow them because I think that nobody outworks the GOATs, whether it be Tom Brady or anybody else. And when you listen to any interviews with Steph Curry or Kobe, who I think their work ethic was absolutely unmatched in basketball. And you could argue that maybe Michael Jordan as well. Kobe would wake up, and if you watch the recent documentary, what's interesting to me is that he would talk about how he'd wake up at 4 in the morning or 4:30 in the morning, and he would hit the gym and he would shoot 1,000 free throws or 1,000 3-pointers until he would make X number. And so to me, it really, it's fundamentals. And that's what I'm trying to distill this whole thing down to is they were so focused on the basics and they were so focused on getting the fundamentals right. That's true in football. Aaron Rodgers talks so much about footwork and fundamentals, balance. You'd think he'd be, I want to throw about accuracy. I want to focus on distance. I want to focus on this. No, he is so focused on the basics because that is what allows you to do the big things. You get to be accurate as a byproduct of doing all the little things right. And, why do you think Steph Curry can make all these 3-pointers? Nobody shoots more 3-pointers than Steph Curry because not only does he work hardest at it, but he focuses on dribbling. When you have kids like my own, and we know because we coach sports, especially basketball, they don't want to focus on dribbling. They want to play the game. And it all has to go back to the basics, no matter what we're talking about. Golf, football, basketball, baseball, business, relationships.
Absolutely. Everybody's looking for the shiny new toy. Everybody wants to learn the Euro step and what the next fancy move is. But the bottom line is, if you can't do the basics or you're missing on the basics, it's going to rear its ugly head quickly.
Well, yeah. How do you do a Euro step if you can't do the basics, like dribble between your legs consistently?
Exactly.
Yeah. So getting back to the basics, what do you think are 1, 2, or 3 things that for those business owners, leaders that are watching, what are a couple things they can take away when they talk about getting back to the basics?
So to me, I go back in a lot of ways to a lot of things we talked around with hustle. I think at the very starting point, in order to get back to the basics, you have to realize what are the productive things that need to have to happen in your organization, and really getting very crystal clear as to what those things are. In business, we can make the simplest task really, really complex. And all of a sudden, the simplest thing that should take 1 step takes 20. And without looking at it, you forget to realize how the hell did this get here? And so I think, in a lot of ways, understanding what really is the thing that's driving your organization, having that clarity of what are the key behaviors, what are the key metrics that we need in order to accomplish our goals. I think if you have clarity there, I think then the second basic is communicate. And I am amazed, and no one ever gets it right, because you can never communicate enough. That's the inherent problem. Because even if you're talking to somebody, you miscommunicate somehow. But to me, I think if you're really clear as to what that vision is, what are those behaviors, what are the expectations, and then communicate, and not one way, two-way communication, so that you're gathering feedback, you're having conversations, you're getting buy-in, you're collaborating and figuring out how to get better. I think if you do those two things really, really well, I think it's really hard to stop you from an organizational perspective. And I think that feeds into your culture.
I agree. I think if you do those things, and a lot of the stuff we talked about, productivity will be a byproduct. You won't have to keep talking about productivity. It will be a thing that happens because you've empowered your workforce. You've built great relationships. You've established great communication. And to one of your last points, I've always told my team and my colleagues, look, you can never over communicate. Almost never over communicate, unless we're talking about sending me texts at 9 p.m. or sending a client a text at 9 p.m. unless it's emergent. But that's important. Let's zoom out. Let's put a bow on this conversation and this episode. Let's finish with our 2023 predictions.
Perfect. Yeah, I believe that in 2023, I think the new norm, I think, will officially start to take hold. I think still in 2022, I think there was a lot of shifting. I think a lot of organizations were trying to decide who they are. To me, 2023 it's going to be about execution. It's going to be about consistency. I think you're going to see, certainly a tough economy. It's going to, create some challenges. But with that change, I think it's going to create tremendous opportunity for the right organizations and the right teams that are focused on culture, differentiation, doing things for the right reasons, and hustling out to get it.
Yeah, good point. I think a couple things is that companies will continue to be less geographic focused on their talent. And if you do that, hopefully, I think you'll start to win the war. You'll start to be more attractive to more applicants. And ultimately, you have a wider net you can cast. So that's important to me. I think we'll continue to see more job jumping. And that's okay. There's not much we can do other than continue to focus on what we can control and what we can do. And if you do that, I think you'll get people to stay longer. But the day and age of people staying at a role for 40 years, 30 years is mostly long gone. And that's okay. It doesn't mean we can't be successful. That doesn't even mean that's a bad thing. Sometimes it's good to hit the refresh button, as my wife would say. I think companies will get more creative, or at least that's my hope. They'll get creative with their job offers like we talked about. And I think that there's going to be a heightened level of expectations for executives, especially as it relates to improving culture, improving and increasing revenue and profitability. But I'll say this, if you focus on your culture and your people, and I feel like we're just hammering this subject, it costs a lot less to focus on what you have versus focus on attracting new talent. If you just take care of your current customer base or focus on your current talent, your team, the byproduct of that is they will take care of your customers. And if they take care of your customers, boy, I mean, that's a whole nother episode in and of itself. So the byproduct and the ROI of having good culture and taking care of your people so they take care of their people, so your clients, is absolutely endless. It is so much greater than anything else you could do. So for my takeaways, it would be go back and listen to this episode a second time, because I think there are really some great nuggets in here. One or two takeaways could really be a difference in the culture that you're able to instill and grow in not only the rest of the year we have here, there's still time in the year to make an impact, even though as we record this, we're in mid-December. But I also think if you zoom out and you say, hey, these are my goals for 2023, if you start that now, you can make a tremendous impact in your organization, not just in 2023, but in the first quarter of 2023.
Absolutely agree.
Any final thoughts, Dustin?
Put a bow on 2022. Let's move on to 2023.
Absolutely. Awesome. Great episode. I'm really looking forward to the future. For those of you listening and watching, we've got a lot in store for Hustle Nation, especially as we zoom out, we look at 2023. Not only will we be ramping up more episodes, we're going to have some guests. We're going to dive into some what we feel like are really important subjects in the business world around leadership, coaching, productivity, et cetera, et cetera. So we hope you'll join us again. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for being part of the Hustle Nation. Until next time, stay hungry and inspire those around you to hustle.